It's July 20th, 2024, Asala Puja. And we chanted the Dhammacakka Pawatana Sutta, the setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. That was is said to be the first teaching of the Buddha to the Panchavaggiya bhikkhus, the first 5 disciples. And then at the end of that, we have Anya Kondanya. He was just known as Kondanya before, but then when he saw the Dhamma, and his Dhamma eye, the Dhamma Chaku, the Dhamma eye opened, and he became a stream enterer. He saw all things that arise pass away, and saw that in the way of Dhamma, and then he became Anya Kondanya, or Kondanya who knows, and the Buddha exclaimed, he's understood. He understood the teaching. People can understand this. So it's said that Asala Puja, the full moon of July, and the Buddha turning the wheel of the Dhamma is significant. We consider it the Dhamma day, but in a way it's also Sangha day because the Arya Sangha was born, the first stream enterer, the first one to have a noble attainment after the Buddha. So in that also the triple refuge was born on this day, the full moon of July, according to the stories. So that first there was the Buddha discovering the Dhamma, but then it's said that the Sangha, the Arya Sangha, the noble Sangha, was born on this day with Anya Kondanya seeing the Dhamma for the first time, understanding the teaching. And so we can do this, we can understand this teaching, the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. And some of us won't be able to understand it, but at least we can hear about it and we can come closer to an understanding of it. Some of us may not be able to penetrate this teaching. And even for bhikkhu disciples like Venerable Ananda, who actually did understand it but didn't understand it completely, Ananda wasn't an arhat until after the Buddha had already entered parinibbana, after the Buddha had already passed away. So Ananda was in his early 80s before he finished his practice, before he reached arhatship. And so we just, no matter how long we've been practicing, we just need to keep going. We just need to keep going. That's one of the most commonly given pieces of advice if you go to Thailand and ask a Kruba Ajahn, if you ask one of these meditation masters for advice. That's one of the most common answers you'll get is "Bai rei rei," keep going. And then the other really most common piece of advice is "Gatong rawang," like you have to be careful, practice carefully. So there was this, I've been gone for quite a while, been gone for a couple of weeks. On June 30th, took Ajahn Sek to the airport as he's spending the Vasa period in Thailand this year. And then next day, July 1st, went to the airport to receive Ajahn Amaro. And then on July 2nd, he led the first Tuesday at Berkeley teaching. And then we came back that night. We arrived just after midnight, I think it was. And then 3rd and 4th, he was here. 5th, on the 5th, we went to Spirit Rock, and there was this 10-day retreat at Spirit Rock. And after that, on July 14th, I got on the red-eye flight, San Francisco to Boston, met up with Lungpa Pasano and the group there at Temple Forest Monastery, and we had the American, what was it, the AAAA?
Americas.
Abbots of the Americas. Associated Abbots of the Americas meeting. Associated Abbots and Ajahns of the Americas. I think that's what it was. Because it wasn't just Abbots, it was also Ajahns. And then coming back yesterday, and there was the worldwide computer glitch. And so yesterday was a very long day. And some of the highlights of this Spirit Rock retreat, the theme that Ajahn Amaro chose was the 4 Noble Truths and dependent origination. And so there was a lot of reflections given around that. And the way I hold the teaching of the 4 Noble Truths is that it is just a summary of dependent origination. And the teachings of the Buddha, any teaching, it's like a sheet on the ground. So anywhere you pick up a sheet, the whole rest of the sheet comes with it. And the teachings of the Buddha are really the same. Any teaching you choose, all the other teachings are going to come up with it. So if we look at the Four Noble Truths, we have suffering, craving, and the end of suffering, and then the path leading to the ending of suffering. And if we look at dependent origination, then it starts with ignorance, and then it goes up this ladder up to feeling and craving and so on to suffering. So it does include, the Four Noble Truths are included in dependent origination. It's just a slightly different framework, different way of seeing it. So ignorance is avijja, lack of clear seeing. I think of it as darkness. And when you shine a light, so you can't see ignorance. Ignorance can't be seen. Just like darkness, where once you shine the light, the darkness is gone. So once there's mindfulness, and once there's very powerful mindfulness and clear seeing, then ignorance is gone. It's that the seeing itself is the absence of ignorance. And so because there is this ignorance, we end up giving rise to craving and eventually suffering. And the ignorance has actually far more subtle and far-reaching implications than just mere suffering. The implications are that it's bound up with craving and rebirth. And the implications of the ending of suffering, the Third Noble Truth, the implications of that is that it necessitates an ending of rebirth, an ending of the round of samsara. Only then will there be a true ending of suffering. And so you could think of the Buddha as, the Buddha doesn't pull punches. The Buddha is throwing down the gauntlet with his teaching. He's saying, apart from abandoning everything, apart from giving up all craving, I do not see any safety for beings. Apart from abandoning all, giving up all, relinquishing all, letting go of all. So that's, the Buddha's putting it out there. He's not going to try to hide the teaching or just soften it because we don't want to hear it. The Buddha's saying, I'm putting this out there, do what you will with it. So the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, it's a very all-encompassing teaching, and we can couple that with, say, dependent origination and so on. So it can, but then when we hear these teachings like this, like the Buddha's talking about abandon everything, well, of course I can't do that. So the Buddha's giving these teachings, but then we can hear these teachings, back up a little bit, and say, okay, well, we're not even going to scratch the surface of this unless the mind can be made wholesome and skillful. So we look at developing the wholesome mind, and this is really the Noble Eightfold Path. There is a path to developing wholesome qualities and letting go of unwholesome qualities of mind. So to bring the mind into a uplifted state, a good mood, just giving rise to a good mood. And this is actually not that easy to do. It's so easy to get into a bad mood. So easy to get into a bad mood, and it's dependent on, that bad mood can be dependent on many environmental factors and external states. So the way I think of this with the Four Noble Truths and how we actually practice, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the rubber meets the road, meaning what do we actually do when we meet an adverse condition? What do we actually do? How does the mind actually react with criticism? How does the mind actually react when we encounter an embarrassing situation? How does the mind really actually react when we get praised or floating up in the clouds? When we get criticized, does the mind drop down to hell? And it's so quick and so easy that it can happen, and it's just the mind. It's something immaterial, and yet it changes our whole life. It's felt in the body. When we get upset, it's felt in the body. It's sensed in the body. It's so powerful. It overwhelms our entire being. When we become happy and elated, then it's felt in the body. It overwhelms our entire being. And it's rooted in the mind. The mind is so powerful. So how do we actually make the mind wholesome? How do we deal with these things? We could think of it, one way to think of it is that we make a determination. We make a determination that I will try to make my mind as wholesome and skillful and uplifted and as good as possible despite all the circumstances around me and against all odds, because there's a lot working against us. There's a lot working against us in terms of making the mind skillful and wholesome, making the mind bright, clear, and clean. There's many factors, many things working against us. Our own memories, our own traumas, and just our own grudges that we might be holding, people who may have genuinely mistreated us in the past. And if we aren't able to get the mind out of that muck of the unwholesome, we're not going to do much more than scratch the surface of the Buddha's teachings. So it's actually lifting the mind up out of the unwholesome. So we can start to do that with, say, the Noble Eightfold Path and practices like when we look at right thought, the thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, thoughts of non-cruelty. And we can think of non-ill will and non-cruelty in a positive sense as loving kindness and compassion. And even been kind of against this in the past, but just using the word love, just bringing that word up. And that can actually lead to an inner smile. That's the mind starting to become wholesome. So when the mind starts to become wholesome and there's that inner smile that we give rise to an inner smile. This can also be mudita or sympathetic joy. And we can laugh at things in our life. So giving rise to the wholesome mind, anything that happens, seeing it in a positive light. See if that just happened, and if my mind was, it could go into the unwholesome. Do you know how much that cost? 50 cents. Donation box is over there. Yeah, that's like the teaching of Luang Por Cha, the glass is already broken. So if we see the glass is already broken, we won't suffer. We won't suffer when it breaks. So that's like the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, that's like Anya Kondanya, seeing impermanence, and the eye of Dhamma opening for him. And we could say that he saw the glass is already broken, so that when we apply that to ourselves, we apply that to our own bodies, our own lives. If we see that the body, it's already broken, it's within the nature, it's within our nature for these things to break up, and end. That's completely normal, completely natural. That these things break up, they come to an end. So if we see the body is already broken, if we see the body is already, that's within its nature for that to happen, then we don't suffer. Then we don't suffer when it comes to an end. Or even we could apply it to our own meditation. So if we're having a good meditation, if we feel very, very good in the meditation, we don't want it to come to an end. But then we might suffer when it comes to an end. But then if we realize all these things have to come to an end, it's just their nature, then when it changes, then we don't suffer. So this is the very basic way of seeing the Four Noble Truths. But there's so many sides to it, and it's so nuanced. It's like Venerable Ananda coming up to the Buddha and has this bright faith. He's heard the teaching of dependent origination, and he says, it just seems clear as clear to me. It just seems obvious. Dependent origination, of course. The Buddha says, not so, Ananda. Dependent origination is very subtle, very hard to see, not at all easily discernible. So it's actually something that takes time to really look into and contemplate. So I'd like to come back a little bit to making the mind wholesome and combine that with this idea of ignorance, of avijja, because the Buddha talks about the way wisdom and discernment works, both coming from the mind that's becoming wholesome and also causing the mind to become more and more wholesome. So there is this nourishment that occurs What is the nourishment? What is the nutriment for ignorance to arise? And the Buddha talks about that as the 5 hindrances. And each of these 5 hindrances is something which weakens wisdom and hinders discernment. And so, in brief, those 5 hindrances are sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. And so those are 5 things which weaken wisdom, and the other side of that is they strengthen ignorance. So those are 5 things that weaken wisdom, weaken discernment, and they strengthen ignorance. So we take sensual desire when we're lost in any form of sensual desire, whether it's sense desire through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, or body, through those 5 sense bases. And the Buddha talks about how we are normally bound by these 5 cords of sensual pleasure through those 5 sense bases. And if we can cool that down through our practice, through the practice of meditation, cool that down, the mind is going to become more clear, more wise. Ignorance will be weakened, and ill will. And we can think of this as anger, frustration, even irritation. If we react from that state, whatever we say or do is not going to be informed by discernment, not going to be informed by wisdom. It's going to be like a knee-jerk reaction. So when we cool that down, through the practice of goodwill or just patience. Patience is one of the main antidotes. Kanti parami, or in Thai we say oton. That's one of the main antidotes to anger and frustration. And then we'll be able to come more through a place of wisdom and discernment and weaken and lessen that ignorance. Sloth and torpor, the mind is murky, the mind is dark. I think, I kind of have a sense this one can be connected with that second hindrance as well. So when there's anger and frustration, the mind is just exhausted. The mind is just exhausted by that frustration, that anger, that ill will. And so then sloth and torpor. I found that for myself. I was actually in denial about this for many years, but Ajahn Chunda was pretty diligent in pointing it out to me, how much I was nodding during my meditation. And he would point it out to me, and I'd get quite angry. Didn't like that. So, but it was true. It was true. I put a matchbox on my head, and it kept falling off. So, but I do think I have at least a little bit less of that. And because I think I have less anger, it's I can link those together. Less anger, less drowsiness, less sloth and torpor, a little bit more wisdom. And then there's restlessness and worry. Those go together. This is these in Pali. This is some onomatopoeic Pali. Udacha kukucha. So that's udacha is restlessness, and kukucha is worry. So you get this almost this image of somebody just itching, and kind of it's uncomfortable. It's just jumping around. So anapanasati can be used to cool that off, cool that down. If we're coming from a state of restlessness and worry, and whatever reaction comes from that is not going to be informed by wisdom and discernment. It's going to be informed more by that restlessness and worry hindrance. And so cooling that off, everything's going to be okay. Sometimes an antidote to that is just saying, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. We're in the monastery, it's nice and cool in this hall, it's going to be okay. So, and then you have doubt. Doubt is, over the years, I've come to think of this as probably one of the most dangerous and damaging hindrances, actually. I used to think, oh, doubt, it's not that big a deal, But actually, so much suffering. Doubt is just, at this point, I see doubt as just a form of misery. It's just, if we want to make ourselves miserable, just keep doubting everything. Just keep getting lost in doubt. You'll make yourself really miserable. You'll just keep yourself there. So the Buddha likens doubt to muddy water in the dark. So he's got these analogies for these other hindrances, sensual desire being like water with dye in it, ill will being like boiling water, sloth and torpor being like water with pond scum, pond weeds. restlessness being like water with waves on it, but doubt is a double analogy. Doubt is not just muddy water, and it's not just water in the dark, but it's muddy water in the dark. So I think there's a reason for that, and it's just things aren't clear. We're circling around in the dark. Things aren't clear. There's that lack of light, and that weakens discernment. That feeds ignorance. So looking at actually looking into those 5 hindrances can be quite helpful in terms of our meditation practice, in terms of helping to make the mind wholesome. And we shouldn't use this as something to bludgeon ourselves or as a really strong judgment against ourselves. Like, oh, I've got so many hindrances, there's no hope for me. So that's just more of the hindrance of restlessness and worry. So just to actually step back, take stock of things. At the retreat, at the Spirit Rock retreat, I was recounting a story of Longpo Cha talking about college education. And he mentioned that when you get a bachelor's degree, your defilements get a bachelor's degree. When you get a master's degree, your defilements get a master's degree. And when you get a doctorate, your defilements get a doctorate. So this really affected people. There was 100 people on the retreat. And that particular teaching seemed to really ring true for many people. And then there was this sharing circle on the last day, and anybody who wanted could share how the retreat went for them. And one person said, so I've got I went to law school, so I've decided my defilements have a law degree. And they were reflecting how true that was, how they could make a case for anything, for getting away with anything. Finding the loopholes. Well, it's okay if I do this because of this and this and this, and finding the evidence. So just because, this is a Sala Puja, coming back to the Four Noble Truths, and a lot could be said about it, but I think just coming back to a very broad way of seeing the teaching, and just coming back to a sense of gratitude, that's another way to buoy the heart up, to make the mind and heart bright and light, to become a bit more lighthearted, just to look at what we're a part of, and that can naturally give rise to a sense of gratitude. Look at what we have. Look at what we've been given with these Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. Look at how many wholesome qualities the Buddha's given to us, bestowed upon us, and how many unwholesome qualities that the Buddha's been able to rid us of with these Dhamma teachings. But only if we practice. We do need to practice. We can't, if we just leave it as an academic study and we end up not putting these teachings into practice, it's not going to bring that much benefit to us. It will bring some. But the benefit we accrue from these teachings is going to be proportional to the practice that we put into the practice that we put into it. And as Luang Ban likes to say, if you really do it, you really get it. If you really do it, you really get it. And if we really practice, if we really put these things into practice and we make an effort to understand these teachings, we can't not make progress. We can't not make progress. That's a double negative, so I could say it in a positive way too. We will progress. But sometimes we can't not progress. Sometimes we might think, I've been thinking about this for so long and contemplating this, I feel like I haven't gotten anywhere. But we have, because the meditation and the practice, it's not about getting some incredible state of euphoria or bliss in our meditation. It's like, I don't get these states of incredible bliss that I think I'm supposed to be getting, and euphoria. It might be a little bit concerning if we're getting that, actually, because that's not sustainable. So what we're looking at is sustainable well-being. If we think of those two words, sustainable well-being, that's what these teachings are leading us to. Equanimity, serenity, balance, equipoise, clarity, spaciousness, freedom. So that's probably enough said for now, going into the Four Noble Truths a little bit, dependent origination a little bit, just a bit of an overview, putting in a plug for making the mind wholesome, and developing a sense of gratitude and ease and well-being. And at this point, what we're going to do is we will actually bow to the shrine, and I will do an announcement, a call and repeat announcement. So yeah, we don't have to close the Dhamma talk. This can be a continuation, and we will do a recollection of this day of Asalaha Puja. And after this announcement is done, then after that, we will light our candles, and we won't light the incense because it's in fire season right now, but we will light the candles. And by not lighting the incense, we can think of that as a symbolic of not lighting up our defilements. And by lighting the candles, we can think of that as symbolic of lighting the flame of wisdom. And then when we blow out the candles, when we offer them to the rutile quartz Buddha under the bell tower, we will blow out the candles, and we can think of that as blowing out the defilements, blowing out the suffering, and quenching the defilements. And so that'll be after the circumambulation. Also, there'll be 3 circles, so it's traditional to, if you'd like to use a meditation topic, mentally reciting Bhutto, Bhutto, Bhutto on the first circle, mentally reciting Dhammo, Dhammo, Dhammo on the second circle, and then on the third circle, mentally reciting Sangho, Sangho, Sangho. So I expect you to remember all of that, and we will now bow to the shrine and do the announcement.